You can't blame an old man.
What are you looking at? I'll tell you at the time. How are the levels?
They're leveling.
This will be cool. You all good over there? Cool. Let's rock and roll. Awesome. Well, folks, this is the time. Episode 1 of the Battlefields and Bourbon Podcast. I'm Jack Owens, one of the co-hosts, joined here with the man, the myth, the legend, Elijah Filbert.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're excited. We're super excited. Huge, thank you to the folks that have already liked our social media pages. Are excited to see some content come out, and we're just excited to see where this goes. We have no idea, but we've been planning this for a while, and it's just excited to sit down and record episode 1. And without further ado, we want to get started with the bourbon and not waste anybody's time. So I'll hand it over to the expert of this group, Elijah, to talk about the bourbon for this episode and a little bit about it.
Yeah, so tonight we've got Eagle Rare 10-year. This is one of Buffalo Trace's kind of staples. The 90 proof 10-year bourbon. It's their mash bill 1, so they've got like mash bill 1 and 2. Number 1 is their low rye mash bill, so that's going to be predominantly corn, lower rye content, higher corn content, and then malted barley, obviously for your fermentation purposes. Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, both on their mash bill number 1, low rye stuff. You can find this, if you can find it. It's pretty hard to find these days. $32 roughly. Beware of price gougers. There are people that will try to take advantage of you, charge 4 times MSRP and that kind of thing. Don't do that, please. But yeah, without further ado, we can crack this one open and have a taste. But
hopefully we got that good pop sound coming in there. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we got a little more there. There's that.
So as a low rye, does that sort of, what would make something, or what would define something that is like on the, if it's that even the term high rye, would that be like moonshine or something like that? Or
so high rye mash bills are going to give it a little more of a spicy flavor. This being a low rye, you're going to get more of a sweet kind of taste to it. So, I mean, if you just take your glass and kind of give it a little nosing. Oh, yeah. Biggest thing that they tell you when you tour distilleries and stuff, and you do a tasting, when you do a nosing, keep your mouth open, because apparently that helps you kind of smell all the smells a little better.
This first episode.
Yeah. We probably look a little silly,
yeah.
But just kind of take in the smells, like what kind of notes you pick out of that. Like for me with Eagle Rare, it's always been a kind of cherry, vanilla, chocolatey, those kind of things in that one. Very mellow. That probably has something to do with the age. I mean, 10 years, that'll kind of mellow it out a little bit for any kind of bourbon. But yeah, your higher rye mash bills are going to be a little spicier because rye is a spicy grain as it is. So with these being more corn than rye, obviously any bourbon's got to be at least 51% corn to be bourbon. But it just depends on the percentages. Buffalo Trace does not, they don't disclose what the ratios are in those mash bills. I mean, obviously you're like the biggest distillery in the world. You got to kind of keep that under lock and key. Yeah. That's got to be a secret. Can't give away all the goodies. But if you want to taste it and just see how it is. It's always one of my favorites. Yeah, very affordable when you can find it. I mean, it's always a good bottle.
That's not bad.
But yeah, I mean, this is your first time.
No ice.
First time, no ice. Yeah, first neat pour.
Neat. That's the term. There you go.
Yes, sir.
Not on the rocks.
Yes, sir. But yeah, it's a good one. Always one of my favorites. I like everything Buffalo Trace does. I mean, I'm probably one of those guys that people are like, oh, you're just a fanboy, a bandwagoner, and all that stuff. I know a lot of people give Buffalo Trace a hard time just because.
But there's a reason it's the
most desirable.
Superior.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's all. And I thought it was neat. You and I were talking before recording about the 10-year thing. How some of those barrels that are in this mix could be older than 10 years.
Exactly. So. Yeah. So one thing with bourbon, when you see an age statement on a bottle, like a 10-year, 15-year, whatever you got. The youngest barrel is what they advertise. So say in your batch, you've got barrels that are 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. They have to notate the youngest barrel on the age statement, because the oldest, there's a kind of law there, I guess.
It makes sense, though.
Yeah, you want to be transparent, so you're saying what the youngest one is, regardless of what ratio percentage that youngest barrel is in that entire batch.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eagle Rare used to be a single barrel, and then they switched it to a batch. So yeah, it's now. I mean, I think it's great either way. I wouldn't change anything about it, but
no, it's definitely. I'm not turned away from it. It's I've had some bourbons that I've tried to, on my own taste and eat, and
a little harsh.
It's harsh, and trying to make yourself like it. It's a whole different thing. But I'm not even putting it on. Tastes pretty good. It's very easy on the taste buds.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I like the most about it. Is, I mean, some of these new up and coming distilleries and stuff. I mean, they put out younger product because they've only been out for so long. They can't afford to put out old stuff because they haven't been around that long. And obviously, your younger products can be a little harsher, depending on how they're aging it, what they're doing with it, the mash bills that they're using, that kind of thing. But obviously, Buffalo Trace, they've got it figured out. They've been doing this since the Civil War, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we're talking about it. I mean, they've been doing this thing for as long as anybody. So, yeah. I mean, and now that we've got our bourbon, it's time to start talking battles, right?
Yeah. So this episode, we are going to discuss the Second Battle of Winchester. And the reason for that is just about a month ago, historians and Civil War buffs celebrated the 160th anniversary of the Second Battle of Winchester. So when you and I were talking about episode 1, we thought, what better battle than this one? And it's local. It's right here in Winchester where we're recording, and it's a battle that you and I both find very fascinating and interesting. And
my favorite,
yeah,
for sure.
Your favorite, my favorite, depending on the day.
Yeah.
But it's I love it, and we're going to talk a little bit about why we love it just by the points we're going to make. So this battle takes place from June 13th to 15th, 1863. So this is as Robert E. Lee is headed north on his Gettysburg campaign, heading to Pennsylvania, and he sends Richard Ewell's Second Corps, he's recently in command of after.
This is just after Jackson died, right?
Yeah, Jackson's going to die in the early May, the month before, after contracting pneumonia, they say, after his wounding by his own men during his flank attack not flank attack, but after the flank attack as he's moving through the woods at the night, doing some night reconnaissance during Chancellorsville. So Ewell's going to take command of this Second Corps, and they're going to pitch, break down their tents around Culpeper Courthouse in early June, and head west towards the Shenandoah Valley to use it again as an avenue of invasion. Keep in mind, this valley would be used multiple times by both armies as a diversion tactic, as a kind of a way to pump into a certain area or a certain region. This will be used before by Lee in the fall of 1862 during the Maryland campaign. He'll have to swing back into the Shenandoah Valley, send Jackson back into the Shenandoah Valley before Antietam to eliminate troops in Harper's Ferry. So Lee's gonna use this with Ewell to invade the north. So they cross Chester Gap across the Blue Ridge Mountains next to
Front Royal, right?
Yep, Front Royal. So they're going to cross there, and that's where Ewell will split his corps into their 3 divisions, one under Jubal Early, Edward Allegheny Johnson, and Robert Rhodes. And he'll split there, sending Robert Rhodes north to Berryville, where there's a brigade. It's the 3rd Brigade. McReynolds' brigade is there at that time in Berryville. And he'll send Edward Allegheny Johnson on the Front Royal Pike, modern-day 522 to Front Royal, and then Early's guys across to the Valley Pike, or modern-day Route 11, to head north. So this 3-prong approach to the Winchester, Berryville, the lower Shenandoah Valley.
Setting it up early.
Yeah, setting up early.
No pun intended.
Yes, no pun intended. Do you want to give some stats, Philly, about what the forces are looking like for the Confederates and Federals?
Yes, I mean, you're looking at 12,500 roughly Confederates in the Second Corps. You're looking at a pretty overwhelming force, I mean, compared to the 7,000 that Milroy's got in town. And one thing of note that I always find interesting is that I believe Milroy was given the order not to hold the town of Winchester if they were attacked. And he's like, well, I'm going to do it anyway, sort of, kind of.
Yeah.
And he just gets outmanned here, and it just doesn't work well for him. I mean, as we'll get into. But obviously, I mean, as there's no spoilers here, this battle was a Confederate victory, and for a number of reasons. I mean, largely contributing to just the strategy that Ewell played out from the beginning. As soon as he gets into the valley, he's got that game plan, the three-pronged attack. I mean, there's just really nothing Milroy can do at that point. I mean, he's chosen his hill to die on, so to speak. Granted, he escapes, but he holds up in his fort and he thinks he can hold him, but it just doesn't go that way.
Yeah. So setting up the Federals here in Winchester, Robert Milroy will arrive with his division from the 8th Corps on January 1st, 1863. They'll arrive in town, and he'll begin immediately fortifying the town, but also, reestablishing previous fortifications that have been built as early as the summer of 1861 by Confederates that were here. So he'll begin reinforcing those, building new ones around the city of Winchester, or the town of Winchester, and these include West Fort, Main Fort, or Fort Milroy, which was a combination of Fort Jackson, an early 1861 fort, and Fort Garibaldi, another 1862 in the fall fort that was constructed, kind of forming one large fort, the main fort. Star Fort, Fort Collier already exists there along the Valley Pike as of 1861. You'll have some more redoubts next to other fortifications, as well as some entrenchments on the south side of town on Bowers Hill. I haven't been able to find in my research any definitive. You and I have talked about in the past the Parkins Mill Battery out there off 522 South.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's still existing. It's just privately owned, and
gorgeous fort. It's so well preserved.
Pristine. It's such a pristine, preserved in air quotes, let's say.
Yeah.
But I haven't been able to find any evidence that states that was constructed under Milroy's occupation. That says it definitively, because it's kind of off the beaten path, but it was constructed during the Civil War, and it's on a lot of maps. And it's my understanding that would have been possibly occupied as Edward Allegheny Johnson's Confederates are making their way north to Winchester. And this will kind of really start the battle. On June 12th, some skirmishing will take place just north of Middletown with the Confederates that are taking the Valley Pike, and some Federal units that are down there just south of Newtown at the time, today's Stephen City. And that'll kind of begin the battle. As Milroy gets wind of this, he'll start bringing some troops down to where a lot of battles around Winchester start at Pritchard's Hill. And they'll have some Federals from the Valley Pike up on Pritchard's Hill, and Confederates will begin to attack there, ultimately pushing back to the area of Bowers Hill, where modern-day John Hanley High School is. And that'll kind of finish up the 13th. That's what will happen on the 13th and the 12th with the skirmish before around Middletown. A lot of people debate, well, not a lot of people, I say, it's in some printings of maps and other documents, that this battle's like the Second Battle of Winchester takes place on June 13th and 14th, and then they consider the Battle of Stevenson's Depot, which is the action on the 15th, is a totally separate battle. And what are your thoughts on that, Elijah?
The Battle of Stevenson's Depot, as they would call it, is a direct result of Second Winchester. I would include that as part of Second Winchester. Yeah. I mean, that's the finale right there.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree with you. It's all the same troops, the same movements, and
the very next day too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all in sequence.
So we'll get to maybe why people think about that as a separate battle, but nonetheless, as we get to the 14th, fighting will resume on Bowers Hill, keeping the attentions of the Federal forces looking towards the south. It's at that point in the morning that as the Federals evacuate Bowers Hill and move to the fortifications like Main Fort and Star Fort and West Fort. There's an account that Jubal Early, the division commander, along with Richard Ewell, will climb Bowers Hill with the rest of their force behind them to the south and get a lay of the land. And it's at that point that they'll be able to see the fortifications and the Federals in those forts. But what Milroy doesn't know is he's able to climb in this flagpole I'm sure you've heard of. In Main Fort, there was this 80-foot flagpole. So the fort often gets the name Flag Fort because that's where the stars and bars were. Milroy would climb in this basket that was tethered to the pole and get to the top 80 feet in the air and be able to look over the battlefield. But the height of that flagpole on the hill that's the Main Fort's on, with the height of the flagpole added in, is not taller than Bowers Hill. So
right.
As Milroy gets up there, he's not able to see the Confederates on the other side of Bowers Hill. So
he doesn't know what he's facing.
He doesn't know what he's facing. And that's this, 12,000, almost 13,000 Confederates that are coming in all different directions. So Ewell and Early will kind of devise a plan to send Early around to the west. Using the Cedar Creek Grade Road, which is still the same road today. They will march west out of Winchester, south of Bowers Hill, west out of Winchester, while there's still some of the Confederate forces engaging with Federals in the vicinity of Bowers Hills to keep their attention drawn there. And this is an all-day march. It'll start in the morning of the 14th. They'll march out Cedar Creek Grade, and then once they get to the area of the hills around Little North Mountain, use that as cover and head north. And they want to get up to West Fort because as those two generals that morning were standing on Bowers Hill, they were able to see West Fort and Main Fort and Star Fort. And they knew, okay, if we take West Fort, then we can take Star Fort, and then we can use those forts to take Main Fort, and then we've got it. So they kind of were able to make their plan then.
Little domino effect.
Exactly. So that's what they'll do. And Early will take his division and march out west on Cedar Creek Grade and and there's no, Milroy has no idea this is happening. He'll send some scouts westward in the morning of the 14th, but by the time they come back,
they
just miss the Confederates. And it's about in the afternoon in the later evening of June 14th, where the Confederates will find a position in a large set of woods on top of that hill, facing West Fort, just west of West Fort. And as they get into the woods, they take positions, they hunker down, they just marched along. This is a huge flanking maneuver. And I've spoken about this with other historians and their thoughts, and it's very calculated, very smart, very tactical. And you can only imagine that they took some inspiration from the months prior Jackson's flank march that was done at Chancellorsville, or other flank marches done by Jackson. So it seems that there's there's Jackson-esque, inspiration in some of these maneuvers.
Is still there.
The presence is there. And as they get in those woods, there's a really neat account of, it's not Early or Ewell, it's someone else, I believe. And as they're in these woods waiting, and they're able to look across the open fields, there's a cornfield, and some open fields between them and this area where West Fort is on the hills east of where they are. They see a paper pinned to a tree. So one of the Confederate soldiers, looks at that paper, and it says, it's dated months prior to June, and it says, "These trees must be removed by this such and such date," which had already passed, under orders of General Robert Milroy. So if those trees hadn't have been there, I'm sure those Federals would have seen the Confederates forming up on that hill just west of them, but they don't. And what will ultimately happen is Early will send out he'll roll out his artillery, and I believe around the 6 o'clock range, he'll unleash some artillery.
Yeah, 20 guns.
Oh, yeah.
Stiles' battery, and I forget who the other one was. But yeah, 20 pieces of artillery. And from what I had read, 45-minute barrage before they attack West Fort. So to put that into perspective, from the things that I've heard in terms of artillery based on the field manual, you're looking at about one shot every 3 minutes by 20 guns for 45 minutes. That's some substantial artillery fire right there. And I mean, the guys in West Fort are already lightly garrisoned as it is. I mean, there's only maybe what is it, 1 or 2 Ohio regiments?
Yeah, it's a couple Ohio regiments up there. The fort's really strong to the west, to where it's facing. It's West Fort, and it's open at the rear.
Good escape for them.
It's good escape. It was designed for that purpose, so they could retreat. Every aspect of these fortifications, the way they were designed and where they were put. The Confederates took they complemented that by how they planned this attack.
Absolutely.
They didn't take any shortcuts with it. They hit them where they planned to be hit. There's the accounts of the up in West Fort, these Ohioans, a couple Ohio regiments, I believe you're correct. They're sunbathing. They're cooking some coffee. They're fixing their supper up there in West Fort. They're laying on the ramparts of the fortification when all of a sudden this 20-gun artillery barrage will open fire on them and you can go to this area today to see where this takes place, right behind where the Winchester Equipment Company is, off, I believe it's Indian Hollow Road now.
Yeah, that's it.
And if you go there and you can overlook that field looking southwest or southeast, I'm sorry, and where modern day 37, the road runs across the hill above that is where West Fort was, and then off to your right, close to where you would be standing if you went, is where the Confederates were, and then across those open fields is where this artillery barrage would shoot over, and then leading into the next thing is after about 45 minutes, the guns will stop, they'll cease fire, and then I believe it's like 9 regiments or so of Louisiana troops, and then maybe that one North Carolina regiment will eventually...
57th, I believe, they're coming around from... They came across the fields at Brierley Farm, I guess, from where Winchester Church of God is now.
Yeah.
Across the fields there, almost like a wider flank to where the other battery was, where modern-day James Wood High School sits.
Yeah, it shows it on Hotchkiss's map as the regiment. If you find Jedediah Hotchkiss's version of the Second Battle of Winchester. For reference. And we'll include a picture. If you go to our social medias, we'll include a picture of these maps, as well as a picture of the bourbons we're sipping on currently. So,
of course, got to put it out there.
Yeah, a little reminder: if you don't have a beverage with you, grab your favorite beverage and sit and sip with us as we continue talking this battle. But yeah, I believe on the map it shows that one regiment, charging or pursuing towards an unmanned fortification. There's no Federals in that earthwork where James Wood High School is today.
Good hill to have, though.
Oh, it's a great hill. Great hill. And but yeah, those Confederates, majority of them Louisianians, will step off, and these are the same guys. These are the ones that made up these famous Louisiana Tigers, that'll charge the hell spot of the valley up until that point, if not the whole valley, during the war at the Coaling during the Battle of Port Republic, which I'm sure will be a topic at another later podcast. But they'll charge and take the Coaling. They'll perform well here, but it's not without trial. The Ohioans in the West Fort have Spencer repeating rifles, or not Spencer, sorry, Henry repeating rifles. Yeah. So from the accounts I've read and historians I've talked to, these guys have those guns.
That's interesting because I didn't know that. That's a new one for me.
So recently acquired Henry repeating rifles, and if I'm wrong, someone will tell me. So,
yeah.
But I've heard that many a times. So they're outfitted with those couple regiments up there. But those Louisianians will try. There's some obstructions, some abattis, some mangled up trees and pointed spikes at the base of West Fort along the hill. Sure. So they have to scale those and make their way up this steep hill with guns right in their face. But it's after, multiple attempts, they finally take the hill. And
from what I read, I mean, they swept the works. Once they finally got up to them, I mean, they really laid the hammer down, so to speak. I mean, there's accounts of them, like, the Deep South regiments carrying those Bowie knives and everything. That was one thing that was mentioned, was the fact that these Louisiana Tigers had their Bowie knives, and they were getting into some hand-to-hand combat in the breastworks, and they're, to be somewhat graphic, I mean, they're cutting the throats of these Ohioans, like, they're not holding back at all. No. And I mean, they send them scrambling for the main Fort Milroy. I don't think it was a very, very intense fight once they got into the works. I think those Ohioans were pretty well battered after getting such an artillery barrage, like, fired down on them. and then getting swept like that. I mean, there's not much you can do. I mean, I think they knew when to say when. Not to say that they were being cowardly or anything, because obviously they put up a fight against an overwhelming force from the beginning. So I mean, that's beyond commendable. But at the same time, I mean, they knew when enough was enough.
Yeah. These it's very similar to, like I was saying, with what they did at the coaling, which is also made up by, I believe, a couple of Ohio batteries there.
We meet again.
Yeah, these guys are meeting again, and they're doing the same things that I know at the coaling. They were slitting the throats of the horses, hand-to-hand combat.
They didn't hold back.
It's depicted very well in Keith Rocco, a great artist, his painting of it. So it's and it's the same scene here at Second Winchester at West Fort. Yeah, and these Ohioans, like you said, Elijah, they come scrambling back to the main fort. You got to keep in mind, if you drive, there's a road that kind of cuts the area between West Fort and Fort Milroy, or what would have been, and that's Fox Drive, which was a road, not Fox Drive, but there was a road there present at the time of the war. So that area between there is where these Ohioans are retreating west to east from. And you got to keep in mind, all open fields, not a lot of trees in this area. It was all open ground. So the Federals, I'm sure, could hear that we're in Main Fort and Star Fort. I know you've got the Baltimore Light Artillery in in Star Fort, and you've got some other infantry regiments as well as some batteries in Main Fort, in Fort Milroy. And I could just imagine, they're not able to see over West Fort.
But they're like, what's going on?
But during those 45 minutes of the artillery bombardment, the noise they're hearing, the overshot that's, I'm sure, coming closer in between the ground, between them, watching that, and then all of a sudden seeing these Louisianians pour over the ramparts of the fortification, and
all you can do is watch.
And all you can do is watch. And there's an account by a gentleman in the Baltimore Light Artillery that's in Star Fort, and he sees a gun limbered up and come racing down the Pewtown Road, which was modern day 522,
right?
Coming for safety in these fortifications. And I can just imagine watching that, but then all of a sudden it's like one of those oh crap moments.
Yeah.
And now the guns.
What's he running from?
Yeah.
What's making him do that? Because that's not a normal occurrence, I guess. You're not going to be.
Yeah. So those guys, and so now West Fort is taken by Confederates. The guns will now turn. Now keep in mind the West Fort is open at the rear, but the guns will turn, and they'll turn on Main Fort and they'll turn on Star Fort, and but at the same time you've got Star Fort and Main Fort now firing at West Fort. And something to keep in mind, and like I was saying, with these fortifications being built the way they were and open at the rear and things like that, at the same time these guys had been in Winchester, these Federals, working on these earthworks and hanging garrison in the town since January up until now June 1863. So there for 6+ months. So during that time, a lot of time to practice, prepare, and these guns that are in Star Fort and Fort Milroy, they know the exact distances between these fortifications.
They're dialed in.
So they're dialed in. They're ready to go. So as soon as those guns turn in West Fort, the guns in Star Fort and Fort Milroy don't even have to cut fuses. These fuses are already cut, and they can start firing directly at West Fort. So there's an advantage there for the Federals. But the fighting is heavy. It's hot. Just because it's artillery, there's no infantry fighting here. It doesn't make it any less ferocious. And there's great accounts, and I'll keep using them because I love Star Fort, by the Baltimore Light Artillery that's in there. So around Star Fort, you've got a ring of rifle pits, and in those will be the 6th Maryland Infantry, and these are all guys in McReynolds' 3rd Brigade and Milroy's division. And you'll have some cavalry there in reserve, but you'll have the 6th Maryland and the rifle pits surrounding Star Fort, and then the Baltimore Light Artillery that has 6 3-inch ordnance rifles positioned in Star Fort, firing at West Fort. And they just say that this was some of the heaviest fighting. One gentleman climbs the mound of Star Fort to get a better look of what he can see, and he can tell that they're taking out caissons and blowing up cannon wheels, and they're doing heavy damage in the fort. And then next thing you know, stuff's whizzing past him, and he says it's the closest to death door he's ever been. And there's not too many casualties taken. a lot of horse flesh lost during this by both sides, but specifically the Federals. But ultimately, this bombardment will continue between the fortifications through the night. There's tons of Federal accounts that there was a Confederate infantry attack at the fortifications at night, but there's no Confederate accounts of this. So it's amongst all historians that there's more than likely this large-scale infantry attack did not happen by the Confederates, but it's nice to think about what could have been, because there's great accounts by these Baltimore Light Artillery guys that say the 6th Maryland was pulled back into the fort and it's surrounding the other cannons that are in there and hugging the rifle pits, hugging the the mound of the fort, aiming their guns down. They're loading canister into their guns, prepared for a direct attack. That evidently didn't happen. So it's an interesting thought, but there's tons of Federal accounts of it, but no Confederate accounts.
Oddly enough.
Yeah. But you thought, if there was a massive charge,
they would have bragged about it. They would have taken pride in that,
my
for sure.
Gosh. Especially what's going to happen a couple weeks later. They want to take this credit as the Pickett's charge of Second Winchester or something like that.
No doubt.
Yeah, but throughout the night during this artillery bombardment, like I said, so this, you got to think it's around 7 o'clock that the Confederates will take West Fort, let's say. So it's even later that this bombardment will take place between the fortifications. So it's getting dark outside. And there's great accounts from the civilians that are in Winchester of climbing rooftops of houses and watching the bombardment take place. And they say it's an amazing sight watching these large siege guns, which are in the fortifications, specifically in Main Fort. Something, they're firing 24-pound
24-pounder mortars, 20-pound Parrots. I think even a 30-pound Parrot. I think they had one of those in there as well. Not that I've ever seen one of those found from around here.
Yeah.
20-pounders for sure.
Oh, yeah. I know in the collection at the Civil War Museum before it was renovated, and I think now on display in the 1863 exhibit, there are some of those shells. There's a solid round that was found, back in the day in Fort Milroy that was never fired. They said they found it there, but then they found the fragments of a round similar to it over at West Fort. So it shows that these large rounds were fired.
That's where they were sending them,
And I just can't imagine these siege-style guns in Winchester, and people are just amazed that they're here. But, if you keep in mind, up by Harper's Ferry, on top of like Maryland Heights and Loudon Heights, there's massive guns placed up there too. They
were there. They had the naval battery, the mortars there for that very purpose. Fort Duncan was outfitted with 30-pound Parrots as well. The Federals had it. If they needed it for a town that they felt was worthy of holding, they had the artillery to back it up. That's for sure.
Which is interesting in the case for Winchester because
they didn't use it.
Well, yeah,
they did, but they didn't.
They did, but they didn't. But it's like, strategically, no one could ever hold this town.
No.
So these fortifications, if you're looking at a map of Winchester, and again, we'll post this map that we're looking at, you'll notice that majority of the fortifications that you'll see on this map are the ones that are engaged and used, but Star Fort, Main Fort, and West Fort and the redoubts surrounding those are all if you drew kind of a line, if you broke up the map, it's in the north, it's in the top left corner. So it's in the northwest area of Winchester.
And that's what you're working with.
So that's where all your defenses are. Because that's
the
where the
town.
ridges, Yep.
It's
open plain fields to the east of Winchester that come straight into the town. To the south, you got a couple ridges. To the west, you've got a lot. In the north and west as well. But if you're taking an attack from the west, sure. But that's what happens in a way, because that's where the troops are.
Sure.
But initially, this attack's going to come from the south, and Milroy's not prepared. And sure, could the Confederates continued the fight through the town? But they wouldn't have wanted to do that. They wouldn't have wanted to bring the battles to the streets of Winchester.
Didn't need to.
Didn't, what's between the Confederates on Bowers Hill and the Federals on, where Fort Milroy is the town of Winchester.
Yeah, you're not trying to bring the civilians into it, especially from a Confederate standpoint, because that's their, for a lot of those boys and those regiments, that's their homes, their families. There was a lot of local folks that fought in that battle. From this area, and they're not going to try to do unnecessary damage to their childhood homes if they don't have to.
It takes a little bit, and Milroy, if you've ever read about him, an angry man at times, and
a lot of bad accounts about that guy.
Yeah, if you takes one bad move, and he could just get an itch where he wants to turn the guns instead of facing west and east, he wants to turn them facing south and just pummel the town. So it's kudos to, I guess, Early and them for shifting the battle to the west, bringing the battle to the the Federals that are in Westfort. But it just, when you've got that much force, and that's just one division of Ewell's Corps engaging here. I mean, let's keep him, and we'll bring this up. Edward Allegheny Johnson's guys that are coming in on the Front Royal Pike.
He's doing a little sneaky thing.
The whole time, though, I mean, on the 13th and the 14th, they're engaging like regiments like the 18th Connecticut and other regiments on the western side. I mean, the eastern side of Winchester. So if you're, coming east out of town and you go past the cemeteries and stuff and you start coming out on Route 7, that area, just past the, post office there in town, where a lot of the final phases of the Third Battle of Winchester are going to take place. This is where Edward Allegheny Johnson's going to fight with the Federals on the 13th and 14th. So, the town's surrounded at this point too, and it's just going to keep on getting surrounded. So don't think Edward Allegheny Johnson's just marching off.
He's got a trick up his sleeve.
He's got it, but there's definitely a plan. But back to the civilians, they've got great accounts of Mary Green Howe Lee, Laura Lee. I don't know if Cornelia McDonald has, maybe she does have an account. They all talk about the bombardment and the battle itself. It's crazy to read those accounts, and if you have the opportunity, I definitely recommend looking at some of those. But it was just an amazing sight to see these huge guns firing back and forth at night. But what'll end up happening is Milroy and his guys, his other generals, will gather for a council of war and decide to pull out of town and not surrender, but make a nighttime retreat. So by the time this is all said and done, around like 2 a.m. on June 15th.
Didn't the Confederates cut the telegraph lines too, so he couldn't get any communications out of town?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, it's I believe they're cut on the 12th or the 13th. Those lines are cut.
So he can't call for reinforcements. He's on his own.
Yeah, don't quote me, but I think they were cut when Rhodes makes it to Berryville.
That would make the most sense.
I think.
Because that's where your reinforcements are coming from,
well,
from Washington or Purcellville.
And those telegraph lines run around. It doesn't run. They run up from like D.C. to Baltimore to Hagerstown. It's like a weird loop.
Yeah.
Because you can't just cross, across Mosby territory.
Of course not.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's never going to fly.
Yeah. Mosby's not going to let that happen. So, I believe his telegraph lines are cut off early because he does never receive the direct order to evacuate the town. He gets like, make a good decision, like it's your call, but it's kind of not. Be prepared to leave, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's never the order given, pack your crap and go. From my understanding.
Wasn't it like hold the town if practicable or something along those lines, where it was like very vague, but it was like, don't waste your time if it comes down to it.
Exactly. And Milroy is if you read about it, he's a fascinating guy.
Very arrogant.
He's
and that's putting it nicely.
I've got a soft spot for Milroy. I do at times. Yeah. No, he's just an interesting character. All these generals are, especially all the guys that occupy Winchester.
Oh yeah.
But he's interesting. So he'll hold that council of war. They'll decide the retreat, and around the early morning, the AM of June 15th, they'll do this. And I'll keep using the accounts of the Baltimore Light Artillery and Starfort. They only get, maybe minutes of shut-eye, I'm sure. And they will, have to leave anything that'll make a noise behind. No equipment they take with them. They spike the guns. They dump the guns down wells. They do a bunch of crazy stuff. They're not taking these cannons with them. And not taking a lot of, they're taking some wagons, but the mules don't have to, like the animals equipment can't rattle, stuff like that. They're trying to be super quiet. Exactly. And the Valley Pikes in Route 11, which is their way out of Winchester, is not too far from these fortifications, less than a quarter of a mile to their east behind them. So they'll start heading towards the pike. And keep in mind, and this is such an interesting but often overlooked fact, is during Milroy's occupation, he employs a ton of freed blacks, a ton of them, and for intelligence, for any need, but they're paid, and they know what's happening as these Confederates are coming, and they're hunkering down. Keep this in mind as all this artillery is happening back and forth, this fighting's going on. The Confederates, call them contraband, but these, blacks are going to be hunkered down in the fortifications as well. Former slaves, never been a slave in their life. All these folks will be hunkered down in the fortifications, staying close to where the army is. So at this time, when in the early morning of the 15th, as they're trying to get out, all those folks are following as well. Any civilians that are trying to follow, they're going to follow the Federals out of town. And at this point, any person looking at a map will think, okay, so he's taken to the Valley Pike. He's trying to get out of Winchester. He's probably headed for like Martinsburg or something.
Yeah,
he's not. He's headed for Harper's Ferry, and there's one main road that'll get from Winchester, the Winchester area, to Harper's Ferry, and that's the old Charlestown Road.
Exactly.
Yes, it is. So
that's where it boils down to.
Yeah, that's where it's at. But Ewell knows this is happening. He knows that Martinsburg's not the option, that there's Federals in Harper's Ferry. And so he knows Milroy, if he's going to skedaddle and try to get out of here, he's going to need to use the old Charlestown Road to get to Harper's Ferry.
Now, this is where old Allegheny Johnson comes into play.
So he has the closest division of his is Edward Allegheny Johnson's guys. So he's going to send them cross-country using some back roads and stuff to get up to the vicinity of Jordan Springs, making his way west to along the old Charlestown Road to the Valley Pike to cut off, just in time to cut off Milroy's retreat. So Milroy, by this point, has about, he arrives at, let's say, 7,000 or so. He's got about 8,000 now. And these 8,000 men are trying to go. And just in the nick of time, Edward Allegheny Johnson's there to meet him. And this is where people oftentimes talk about a separation in the fighting, but as we've just told the story of the battle, it flows.
One fluid motion. I mean, it's just one after the other.
Yeah, so Edward Allegheny Johnson's guys are there to meet him. This is where you'll Snowden Andrews with his artillery, regiments like the 10th Virginia Infantry are going to be around in that vicinity using the Winchester and Potomac Railroad, which I believe is inactive at the time of the war. They're going to use the cuts and mounds of that railroad as a defensive position to hide behind with it to their west and be able, which runs and cuts right across the old Charlestown Road. So as these regiments, and you've got other Confederate regiments at the Valley Pike blocking it, so they can't go past that.
Right.
So they're just boxing them in.
They've got them cut off.
So I mean, I'll give credit to the Federals. They do not automatically hunker down and give up. Multiple attacks will happen across the Carter Farm, which is right where McCann's Road ties into Route 11 today. Right around the Carter Farm, between there, along the railroad, up to the old Charlestown Road. And multiple attacks by Connecticut regiments, Pennsylvania regiments, against those regiments, against those Confederates. And there's accounts of Milroy actually personally leading some of these attacks. So he doesn't just cower right away.
Right.
He leads a couple of these attacks, but ultimately he knows, what's happening. So him and his guys get out of Dodge. And there's another great account that supposedly Edward Allegheny Johnson locks eyes and sees Milroy racing down the old Charlestown Road. He breaks through, and Johnson goes after him, but ultimately doesn't get him. So there's that. That's a cool little note as well with this battle. So Milroy escapes, but a lot of his men, 4,000 is the estimate, are going to end up being captured. in different various spots. It's not one large capture. I mean, this is absolute chaos in the early morning of June 15th. But 4,000 plus is the number. This is one of the largest captures of United States troops during the war. The largest will be at the Battle of Harper's Ferry the year prior, but this is huge. That there's this, the casualty numbers will look crazy because of this capture of the Federals on the 15th. And that really, some troops will, like Milroy, other troops will escape, make it to Harper's Ferry. Some will make it to the Martinsburg area. Some will make it up into Pennsylvania.
They were scattered.
Bloody Run, Pennsylvania, which I forget the name of the town of where that is today. They make it crazy far away. So it's but a majority of them, half of them end up being captured. What'll happen is these troops will get rounded up, and matter of fact, a lot of them will get placed back in the fortifications that they were defending the day before. But as this time, those forts will be used as prisons. And some of these men will end up getting shipped to prisons such as like Andersonville, from they being captured at Second Winchester. And a lot of those, the sad thing is too, a lot of those, employed African Americans by Milroy will end up being captured as well. And majority of them will be, rallied up and sent south to work on the defenses around Petersburg and Richmond. Mm-hmm. And there's a fascinating account that I know gets told by a historian and good friend of mine, Professor Jonathan Noyalis. He's done a great deal of research with this, and every opportunity I can to tell this story is fascinating. Gentleman Lee Jenkins was his name, and he lived in Newtown, or from Newtown, modern-day Stephen City. He was a free man his whole life, never was a slave, and he worked before, and when Milroy came to town, works for Milroy, but ends up being captured, and as he's lined up and marched south, he's marching back through Stephen City or Newtown, and as he's marching through there, God only knows what he's contemplating, and and thinking about what it would be like to be a slave, I'm sure, which something he'd never been, he's only seen, and to know that would be something he would be placed into, not knowing if he would ever be out, decided to, he knew the town, and he knew, as they were stopped to march, he ran, broke from the line, and jumped headfirst down a well and killed himself. So he'd rather be dead than. So it's just one of those other stories that's just crazy to put in perspective that these battles, and specifically Second Winchester, affected a lot of other people besides the soldiers themselves. But yeah, Ewell will continue north into Pennsylvania. Milroy makes it to Baltimore, I believe, and tries to plea.
He gets arrested, does he not?
I think he heads to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where he's good friends with the governor of Pennsylvania at the time.
Of course. And
he's like, "Hey, man, it's all good." And the guy was like, "I can't be associated with you. Did you not read the paper?" And so it's not a good look for Milroy, obviously, and it will be something he will never live down the rest of his days. Is the disaster at Second Winchester?
That got him sent out west, did it not?
He'll actually get sent to the Western Theater. Technically, he gets sent to Eastern Tennessee, and he actually, I believe it's with Nathan Bedford Forrest. He fights Nathan, and he actually beats Nathan Bedford Forrest in a battle down there. Yeah, surprising.
That's surprising. Yeah, he's able to redeem himself.
Exactly, a little redemption, but it still does not live down, because what happens weeks later after this is, Battle of Gettysburg, and people just associate it so well, you can't really live it down. The more I've been researching other stuff and learning more as much as I can, this is a very similar situation to what happens in Harper's Ferry in September of 1862. I was just out there last weekend, so that's why it's like fresh in my mind. And I was like reading everything, and I was like, this is kind of like Second Winchester in a way. The capture of troops and just the position of everything, being surrounded, all kinds of crazy stuff. And it, weeks, days later, as a result of that, you have the Battle of Sharpsburg or Antietam, and because of this, weeks later, you have Gettysburg.
These battles with major consequences are opening the door to far more destruction and far worse battles. It's one of those things that they wanna set up this battle to open the gate to another one, and it just ends up. I mean, both Gettysburg and Antietam, Sharpsburg. I mean, the Confederates are playing these amazing strategies to where They're making moves. They're capturing Federals left and right. They're doing all these things to set up their opportunity for their invasion of the North. And every time they get the opportunity to, it doesn't work out for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's all comes down, and that's a totally different topic of numbers and, strategy and all those sorts of things,
Right.
and supplies and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, Second Winchester is it's just a fascinating battle. I think you'd agree with me. I mean, it's your favorite, and it's,
Oh, yeah.
on a good day, it's my favorite too.
I mean, just the strategy that goes into something like that to be able to, I mean, that's like the ultimate game of chess. I mean, like you're able to foresee your opponent's every single move all the way down to the fact that you capture their almost entire force.
Yeah.
All but capturing Milroy himself. Just being able to play that out so well to where you just box them in and there's nowhere else for you to run. I mean, it's just, whether it was a Confederate victory or the Union Army that was pulling something off like that, I mean, that kind of strategy, regardless of who you are, is just battle, impressive.
I think this battle doesn't get enough credit by historians. Scott Mingus, who we'll talk about in a little bit, historian Scott Mingus, he, the reason he wrote the book he did with Eric Wittenberg, The Second Battle of Winchester. There it is, my book recommendation. I'll just put it in now. If you want to learn more about the Second Battle of Winchester, please read The Second Battle of Winchester, the Confederate victory that opened the door to Gettysburg. And that's written by Eric J. Wittenberg and Scott Mingus, published and printed by Savas Beatty. But that's the reason Scott wrote this book and wanted to write this book. He had a connection with some Pennsylvania regiments, always knew about this battle, was a big Gettysburg guy. But, the Second Battle of Winchester only had paragraphs about it, maybe in a Gettysburg campaign book. Maybe it was a page, maybe it was a page and a half, or maybe it's not even mentioned. So, that's why if this is it's like the most perfect, I think, battle to start with. If you're interested in learning about battles, it's so easy to follow. Break it up by day, learn a day at a time. And nothing's overlapping. Maybe, it's not like there's 100 different things, 100 different, regiments fighting each other at the same time, so you don't get lost in it, or it's overlapping conflict on the same field, so you have these different phases you got to look at on a map. It's pretty cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Follow Early's division, follow Allegheny Johnson's guys, Robert Rhodes, clearing the way to the east. And it's a super, it's a fun battle to learn about. You can go to some of these places and imagine what happened and try to paint the picture of what took place. And it's the troop number is pretty low. So it's not a third Winchester. It's not a Gettysburg. It's not, huge battles. But it's a fun one to learn and understand. And once you do, you're like, whoa, this deserves more credit, or just more recognition. In my opinion.
No, for sure. And then the battlefield today, like you guys are doing with the Battlefield Foundation, such a great job of preserving what's left of it. I know a lot of Second Winchester is, it's gone. But you got a recent victory here. Preserving a lot of like the Carter Farm and everything, like the final stages of that battle, where the captures and all the grand finale, I guess.
Yeah, the 153 acres of the Carter Farm recently, the Battlefields Foundation announced, preserved forever. So that's cool. And that kind of opened, it was a unimaginable, you could imagine it. It was just a preservation opportunity that no one thought could happen.
Yeah.
So, it was cool. It's cool to see it happen. The amount of people that came together to make it happen is insane. And to now be able to say oh my gosh, one day people can say, Third Winchester's been a park for a while now.
Right.
And it's pretty established, and it's, that's awesome. But to be able to say, maybe there's going to be, and there's going to be a second Winchester Battlefield Park one day, it's pretty cool.
Right.
A lot of the first and second days fighting is, a lot of the first days fighting's gone around the, Pritchard Farm's still there, but close to Bowers Hill, that's a lot of the first Winchester stuff too. That's gone. Allegheny Johnson's fighting on the eastern side of town. That's gone. There's still some opportunities with the western side of town. with the Early's attack on West Fort. Star Fort is now I believe it's like 17 something acres total, or 18 something acres, off Fortress Drive off 522 there in Winchester, which is just recently went under a huge restoration, clearing a lot of trees there. And
been there in person, looks great.
Yeah, it's
highly recommend.
Yeah, if you check that out on Facebook, there should be a couple pictures. Just look up Star Fort. Yeah, I mean, you can stand in that fort and look in the direction of West Fort and get a perspective and read the accounts, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm standing here. And it's a beautiful, fortification. It's where I fell in love with, my passion for history kept going. But yeah, to be able to have, and that Carter Farm is just maybe a mile north of the James R. Wilkins Winchester Battlefields Visitor Center to the 3rd Winchester Park. So to be able to, be so close to what could be a whole nother battlefield park is huge for, not just obviously recreation and people walking their dogs and, having, just getting out in the elements, but for Civil War people to be able to turn Winchester into a mecca per se of Civil War stuff, and getting it on the map with these places to visit is huge.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, people go to Gettysburg, Antietam, Harper's Ferry. Now they can come to Winchester, and there's, an amazing Civil War museum now, and these multiple battlefield parks and preserve sites, and coming to the National Historic District's, going to be exciting, and it's cool that the 2nd Winchester is now getting on the map. So if you haven't, and you're coming to the Winchester area, definitely come check out Star Fort, and check out the other preserved areas around here that are related, because that Carter Farm, that's where a lot of that final phase of the battle, those, the counterattacks to the Confederate attack and the retreats and the surrender spots, some of those are on there. So it's exciting to, be able to take groups back out there and tour it with Scott Mingus, and, get descendants that are from, the soldiers that were captured there back on the battlefield. It's super cool. So, yeah, you finished your bourbon, man.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm sipping away at it, but it's
just taking a little bit here and there.
Yeah,
little taste.
But no, it's
like I said, it's good stuff.
It is really good. It's a good bourbon for 2nd Winchester.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely fits well.
Yeah, the 2nd Winchester. It's not going to be the biggest one we talk about here. It's not going to be the most interesting one, maybe some might say. But I think between you and I, it's definitely one we've bonded over the years, with the fortifications and
the research aspect of it. I mean, from what you and I both do in our respective fields, I think we've both kind of seen enough of both sides of things to kind of like really garner an appreciation for it, because, I mean, I've got my metal detecting and archaeology side of things to like show you, okay, hey, this is what I've found, what I've seen found that pertains to this battle, and you've got the land and all this other stuff. Like, it brings it all together, because I've always been a firm believer that, I don't want to say the land means nothing without the relics, but the relics are what make the land significant, because if they weren't there, then that land is just another piece of land. It had a battle on it, and these are what came from that battle.
Yeah, the archaeology's huge. It helps tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think as we continue to do this and talk about other topics, it'll definitely help bring some light to some interesting thoughts and theories that have developed based off of what's been found in the ground.
And we've already got a couple of those, especially with Fisher's Hill, but I won't give away any
we'll
surprises on that
talk
one.
about that at a later date. But I think this is that sums up 2nd Winchester. We appreciate everyone for tuning in and listening. If you stuck
hopefully
through.
You guys gained some knowledge from this. I mean, we're happy to share what we've got, and if you have any suggestions for a battle to talk about in the future, a bourbon to review in the future, by all means, I mean, let us know. We're happy to try new stuff, and happy to talk about history. I mean, it's just something we love. It's very near and dear to us, and I think we can never get tired of it. So as long as you keep it coming, I mean, we've got you guys.
Yeah. Ask questions, correct us if we're wrong, at times.
That too.
Yeah. Hit our private messages or direct messages on our, respective social medias. We're on Instagram,
Facebook, YouTube's up. Obviously, we're not recording this episode in terms of video, but that'll come in the future. And then we've got our Spotify, of course, which we hope you're listening to on Spotify right now.
Yeah. And what's our Gmail in case people want to?
It's battlefieldsamdbourbon@gmail.com. That one is available on both our Facebook and Instagram. If you hit the email us platform or the email us button, that'll direct you to our email.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll be able to answer any questions and hopefully bring them up. Any facts or anything you guys want to send us, just send it away. We want to structure this around our interest, obviously, because this is the reason we're doing it. But we hope that if other folks have interest in specific things, we want to bring a light to them. So we are thankful that you decided to sit and sip with us. I love saying that. That's awesome.
Catch it.
Yeah, sit and sip with us on Battlefields and Bourbon, and we'll hope to see you all soon.
Yep, we'll catch you on the next one.